The note was pinned inside the smokehouse door with one of Eli Holt's own harness tags. Maebry Holt read it once, then again, and only after the second time did she let herself sit down on the worn stone step. It said 4 lines. I cannot hold this together. The grove is finished. The bank comes Friday. Forgive me. There was no signature. It did not need one. Her husband had ridden out before dawn on the bay mare. And the bay mare was the only thing on that farm he could have sold by sundown. Maebry was 22 years old. She had wind-brown skin, a spray of freckles across both cheeks, chestnut hair twisted into a loose knot that had started falling apart before breakfast, and the kind of gray eyes that still looked straight at people when life had not yet taught them better. She was standing alone on 51 acres outside Council Grove, Kansas, in the 3rd week of September, 1891, and the thing her husband had called dead was a stand of 172 black walnut trees. The drought had burned through the county the year before. Creeks had narrowed to threads, pasture had gone silver. The corn had rattled in the field like paper. The walnut trees had leafed thin that spring, then not at all. Now their branches stood pale and spare against the prairie sky. No green. No nuts worth gathering. No mercy in them, as far as Eli Holt had been able to see. But the trunks were still upright, the bark still held. And when Maebry stepped into the grove before noon and pressed her palm against the south side of the first dead tree, she felt dry heat stored in the wood like something waiting. She had 51 acres. 172 dead walnut trees. A note at the Farmers and Merchants Bank for $386 due on Friday, $11 in a flour tin, a milk cow named June, 5 laying hens, and no plan. So she did the only thing that felt less deadly than sitting still. She walked the 7 miles into town. At Vale Dry Goods, a broad-shouldered woman in a plum wool dress was trimming lamp wick behind the counter. She looked up once and took in everything at a glance. The dust on Maebry's hem, the note clenched in her hand, the strain around her mouth. Sit down, the woman said. I'll pour coffee before you fall over and make me regret the upholstery. Her name was Agnes Vale. She was 46, widowed, exacting, and known for 2 things, never shorting a measure, and never missing what mattered. Maebry sat. Agnes poured the coffee dark, then added cream and 2 spoons of sugar without asking. And Maebry understood, all at once, that a woman who notices how a stranger takes her coffee notices nearly everything. She handed over the note. Agnes read it once, folded it back along the same crease. Returned it with both hands. Then she said, Eli Holt crossed this street before sunup. I saw him from my upstairs window. He did not look back. Maebry stared at the cup. That is a gone man, she said. But a gone man and a dead grove are not the same thing. Maebry looked up. Agnes lowered her voice. Those walnut trunks are still standing, aren't they? Yes. Agnes nodded once, like a lock turning. Good. Because standing dry walnut is money. Maebry repeated the phrase carefully. Standing dry walnut. She did not know what it meant. But Agnes had said it the way a person says the name of a key. Agnes's mouth moved towards something that was almost a smile. Child, there are men in this county who would travel half a day for timber that's cured itself on the stump. What your husband saw as a graveyard, another sort of person will see as stock already halfway made. Then she glanced past Maebry's shoulder. And as luck would have it, she said, one of those men has been pretending to compare wagon bolts for the last 2 minutes. The man by the hardware bins removed his hat. He was long-bodied and deliberate, with a lined face, a trimmed white beard, and the slow, careful movements of somebody who had spent a lifetime making objects that had to fit together the first time. His name was Gideon Pike, 59 years old, a wheelwright and cabinet maker from Leavenworth who had come south for drier air after the damp ruined his joints. He stepped forward. Mrs. Holt, he said, forgive the eavesdropping. I heard enough to know I'd like to see that grove at first light, if you'll have me. Maebry studied him. Then she said the most important word of her life. Yes. Gideon Pike came the next morning in a spring wagon pulled by a mule the color of old leather. He walked the grove for merely an hour without speaking. He tapped trunks with the back of his knuckles. He shaved a strip of bark with his pocket knife. He crouched beside roots. He looked up through bare limbs into the hard blue sky. At the oldest tree, near the center of the stand, he laid his palm flat against the trunk and closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice came out almost reverent. "This is not ruin," he said. "This is cured walnut." Maebry frowned. He turned to her. "Fresh black walnut has to be cut, stacked, and waited on. Patient men give it years before they trust it into a table, a chest, a bed rail that won't twist and shame them later." He touched the trunk again. "Yours has already done the waiting. Sun-cured, standing dry, tight-grained. If the heartwood runs clean, these trees are worth more now than they were when they were feeding squirrels." Maebry looked over the rows as if she had never seen them before. "I wouldn't know what to do with them." "No," Gideon said. "But I do." He took a pencil stub from his vest and drew 3 quick shapes on the back of a seed invoice. A chair splat, a bowl, a long table leg. Then he looked up. "If you can work and learn fast, we can cover the bank by Friday. If the town buys what Agnes can sell, we can do better than that by Christmas. Friday is 4 days away. Then we ought not waste Thursday." By dusk, Gideon returned with Agnes herself on the wagon seat and a canvas ledger bag on her lap. She had already decided things. Maebry learned that quickly. By noon the next day, there were 6 people in the grove. Gideon had fetched 2 brothers, Amos and Reed Talley, 31 and 27. Steady sawyers who had spent half their lives taking hedge and cottonwood apart on the river bottoms. Agnes had brought her nephew, Silas Vale, a 17-year-old with a growth spurt he had not yet learned to inhabit, who could back a wagon through a gate straighter than most men could walk. And a boarding-house widow named Nell Mercer rode out with bread, beans, smoked salt pork, and the sentence, "I heard there was a young woman out here alone," and I disliked that arrangement. Then she stayed. The Talley brothers set the cross-cut teeth into the first walnut before the sun was high. The saw sang. Dry wood answered with a clean, almost ringing note. Gideon moved behind them, calling cuts. "This section for legs. That one for drawer fronts. Save the straight heart. Mind the curl there. That piece pays bills." He showed Maebry how to read the grain in a fresh face of cut walnut. How to find the dark, clean heartwood. How to judge whether a board wanted to cup, split, or stay honest. By late afternoon, her shoulders were burning through her blouse, and both hands had blistered under the borrowed gloves. But it was the first pain she had felt all week that had a future inside it. At sundown, Nell made them sit on overturned rounds and eat, while the sky went copper and violet beyond the prairie grass. Silas told an awful story about a rooster that had once chased a circuit preacher clean over a rain barrel. The Talley brothers laughed in the quiet way of men who rarely spend words unless forced. Gideon sat with his hat in his lap and said he had not felt useful in 8 years. Maebry listened and kept her eyes on her tin plate because she did not trust herself to speak. The day before, she had still been a woman left behind. By nightfall, she was becoming something else. Friday came at noon on a black gelding. Mr. Percival Dunn, from the Farmers and Merchants Bank, wore a stiff collar and a face trained into practiced sympathy. He rode to the grove, expecting to take stock of a failure. Instead he found felled trunks, sorted lengths, fresh stacks stickered for air, 6 working bodies, and Agnes Vale waiting in the shade with her ledger open. "Mr. Dunn," she said briskly, "Mrs. Holt will satisfy the note today in full. I am advancing against contracted goods. Kindly sign where I have marked." He looked at the pages, then at Gideon. then at the walnut stacks, then back at Maebry, who had sawdust in her hair, and no trace of pleading left on her face. He accepted the bank draft, signed the release, and rode back to town with his surprise sitting stiff between his shoulders. For 9 days, the grove sounded like work. Saw teeth, mallet strikes, axe heads, wagon wheels, Nell's laugh from the cook fire, Silas calling to the team, Agnes reciting figures, Gideon's low voice separating valuable stock from firewood, as if he were teaching a language Maebry's hands had always known but her mind had not. Then the prairie wind changed. It came hard out of the south on a hot midnight front. By dawn, one of the tallest dead walnuts along the ridge had split at the base and fallen straight through the roof of the shed they had just raised. It smashed 2 trestles, crushed the shaving horse, and wrecked an entire stack of chair rails Maebry had spent 3 evenings sorting by lantern light. She stepped out into the wreckage at sunrise and felt the inside of her chest go cold. Not when Eli had left. Not even then. Now. Because this hurt after hope. Gideon came to stand beside her. He did not say it would be fine. He was not a man for lies dressed as comfort. He looked at the broken roofline, at the fallen trunk, at the ruined stack. Then he said, "We built where the wind had a running start." Maebry swallowed. He pointed toward the low slope behind the limestone rise. "We rebuild there. Lower. Tighter. And out of the same tree that knocked this one down." She turned toward him. He nodded at the split trunk. "That tree has already taught us the price of ignorance. We may as well take the lesson." Something steadied in her. She looked again, not at disaster, but at material. Not at proof she should quit, but at the exact point where quitting would make liars of all of them. So they salvaged for 3 days. Gideon showed her how to read the stress lines radiating from the break, how to cut around the violence and keep the straight grain, how to choose what the storm had ruined and what it had merely revealed. The new shed rose in the lee of the hill. Lower roof, heavier bracing, stone footings hauled from the creek bed, pegged joints cut tighter than the first, built, in part, from the walnut that had smashed its predecessor. Maebry did not stand aside for any of it. By the 10th day, she could rough shape a table leg, stack boards for proper air, and pull a shave clean enough to earn Gideon's silence, which everyone understood was praise. Nell brought her a cake of lye soap mixed with goose fat, and said it was the only way to keep working hands from splitting once cold weather settled in. Agnes filled page after page in the ledger. Lawrence. Emporia. Topeka. Then, in the first week of November, a buyer furnishing a hotel dining room in Kansas City rode out to see the stock for himself. He ordered 24 dining chairs, 6 side tables, and a long walnut host stand on the spot. Agnes wrote the total, stopped, and let her hand tremble above the page before she finished. Silas hauled loads into town until the team knew the road better than he did. Alley brothers cut from first light to dark. Gideon turned spindles at the lathe, hands steady as scripture. Nell's cook fire became a kitchen. The shed became a workshop. And the workshop became the loudest answer Eli Holt had never stayed to hear. What changed most, though, was Maebry. She no longer looked at a trunk and saw a tree. She saw bed rails, chair backs, drawer faces, worth, time, possibility hidden inside hardness. By Christmas, the original note had been paid 3 times over, just as Gideon had promised. Maebry Holt opened an account in her own name. Mr. Dunn removed his hat when she stepped into the bank. Eli never came back. A letter arrived from a rail camp in New Mexico the following spring. It said he was sorry. It said he would not return. And it enclosed the signed transfer putting the land in Maebry's name, clear and final. She read the letter once, folded it, set it in the same flour tin that had once held $11 in fear. Then she went back to work. By the end of that first winter, Gideon could no longer tell her spindles from his by touch alone. By 1899, the Holt Walnut Works employed 13 people and shipped pieces as far as Omaha and St. Louis. The dead grove was used up by the 8th year, but long before the last trunk had been milled, Maebry had planted new walnut saplings along the wetter ground by the creek. She planted them herself. Every one. And when people later asked how a woman with $11, a vanished husband, and a dead stand of timber had managed to build a business out of loss, they usually expected her to say grit, or faith, or destiny. Late in life, she told her daughters the truth instead. "I did not see it first," she said. "Agnes Vale saw that I was not done. Gideon Pike saw what the wood could be. I only had the good sense not to say no." Then she would sit back, look toward the younger trees, and add the line her daughters never forgot. "Dead wood is not the end of anything. It is only wood that has already finished waiting."